Welcome to this explainer. Okay, so today we're tackling something I guarantee almost all of us completely take for granted. I mean, think about the sandwich you just grabbed for lunch, or, the milk you poured into your coffee this morning. Have you ever actually stopped to wonder why that everyday routine doesn't make you horribly sick? We kind of tend to just think of food safety as this lucky accident, or maybe just basic kitchen common sense. But here's the thing, it is absolutely not luck. What we're actually relying on is a meticulously engineered architecture. It's this vast, incredibly complex, totally invisible global system built from the ground up to protect us. And to really grasp why this architecture is so absolutely vital, we gotta look at the real human stakes here. 900,000. Let that number sink in for a second. According to the 2015 to 2016 National Family Health Survey, over 900,000 children under the age of 5 suffered from acute diarrhea in India in just a single year. And remember, that staggering number, that's just one metric, right? In one country, in 1 year. It really puts things into perspective and highlights the sheer terrifying scale of the problem if our safety architecture fails. Because when these systems break down, the human consequences are incredibly fast and devastatingly severe. So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to start with the stakes of the food supply, then classify the invisible threats and compare food infection versus intoxication. After that, we'll map out the global regulatory architecture, look at building proactive defense systems, and wrap up with careers in food safety. Let's get into it. Section 1. The stakes of food supply. Let's dive right in and look at the dual imperatives that actually drive this whole global setup.
So there are basically two massive forces at play in the food safety arena: public health on one side and global trade on the other. We just talked about the tragic human cost where, constantly mutating pathogens and the sheer scale of mass production exponentially increase our risk of exposure. But beyond that human toll, foodborne illness is a total economic wrecker. Literally, it brings national economic growth to a grinding halt. It completely tanks a nation's tourism industry when travelers start getting sick, and man, it invites these wildly expensive global lawsuits. Plus, if a country wants a seat at the table in global trade networks like the World Trade Organization, the WTO, they absolutely must have rigorous, standardized safety frameworks in place to protect cross-border distribution. You simply cannot play in the modern global trade sandbox without these invisible systems standing guard.
Now, to really understand our defenses, we need to get our terminology straight, specifically the massive difference between a substance's toxicity and the actual hazard it poses. Think of toxicity like a tiger. Right, a tiger is inherently dangerous. That's its innate capacity to cause harm. That is its toxicity, and it's a fixed trait. But a hazard? That's the probabilistic risk. If that highly toxic tiger is securely locked inside a reinforced steel cage at the zoo, the hazard, the actual probability that you are going to be harmed by it, is practically zero. Food safety systems aren't about eliminating toxicity entirely, because honestly that's often impossible. They're built around managing the hazard. They're about building that cage to reduce the real-world probability of harm.
Moving on to Section 2, classifying invisible food threats. Now that we know what a hazard actually is, let's categorize the specific enemies trying to breach our defenses.
These threats basically fall into three main pillars. First up, physical hazards. These are foreign materials that can cause direct physical injury. And this isn't just some textbook theory, it's the wild reality of, say, a stray nail from a wooden shipping pallet somehow making it all the way into a box of breakfast cereal. Or, yuck, discarded cigarettes ending up in the supply chain. Next, we have chemical threats. These are intentionally or unintentionally added harmful substances. Think lingering pesticide residues or illegal food additives. And finally, the biological invaders. While some of these you can actually see like worms or weevils, the truly dangerous ones are the invisible enemies. Bacteria, yeast, molds, and viruses just lurking entirely undetected in our meals.
We also got to realize that these invisible biological enemies aren't just sitting still. They are incredibly dynamic and highly adaptable. Pathogens like norovirus, rotavirus, and hepatitis E are driving huge percentages of illnesses worldwide. Why? Well, four main reasons. First, host susceptibility. So we're dealing with malnutrition and vulnerable populations. Second, genetic adaptation. These microbes are rapidly mutating to create completely new, highly resilient strains. Third, environmental shifts, like climate change fundamentally altering our agricultural zones. And fourth, the wild reality of globalized exposure. A microbe that mutates on a remote farm on one side of the planet can literally end up on a supermarket shelf on the exact opposite side of the world in a matter of days. The battlefield here is entirely borderless.
Which brings us to Section 3, food infection versus intoxication. The crucial thing here is understanding exactly how these microscopic hazards wage war on our bodies once they slip past the perimeter.
There's a very stark difference between two distinct mechanisms of illness here: infection versus intoxication. Food infection, think salmonella, happens when a live pathogen survives, say, inadequate cooking, enters your intestinal tract, and then literally physically multiplies inside you. And the math on this is absolutely terrifying. Doubling every 20 minutes, just one single bacteria can multiply into over 1 billion in roughly 10 hours. The live organisms are actively attacking your body. But food intoxication, like Staphylococcus aureus, is way sneakier. In this case, a pathogen produces toxins directly inside the food beforehand. So you could cook that contaminated meal perfectly. It smells amazing, it looks completely fine, and the heat does kill the bug. But, and this is a huge but, the heat-resistant toxins remain completely active. You eat the food and boom, illness occurs. The terrifying takeaway here is that these deadly toxins stick around even after the bugs die, and they're completely undetectable to our human senses.
All right, Section 4, the global regulatory architecture. Let's zoom out to the macro level. How on earth do we legislate protection against threats we can't even see?
Well, the answer is a massive, unified legal blueprint. National systems have undergone a total transformation recently. Take India's FSSAI, for example. The past was, honestly, it was pretty chaotic. Imagine trying to build a house, right? But your plumbers, electricians, and framers are all reading from completely different rulebooks. That was the old system, a cumbersome, totally fragmented pile of vertical laws, like the PFA of 1954, completely disjointed. But the Food Safety and Standards Act of 2006, that was a total game changer. It was a paradigm shift that pulled everything into this beautifully unified, integrated, science-based architecture focused on rapid alerts and actual scientific risk assessment. Finally, everyone is building from the exact same blueprint.
And of course, these unified national laws don't just exist in a vacuum, they mirror global anchors. There's essentially a triad forming this global blueprint of trust. First up, the WTO ensures that international trade flows smoothly, but to pull that off, it needs a strictly scientific referee to settle cross-border disputes, and that referee is the CAC, or the Codex Alimentarius Commission. Codex lays down international food code standards to protect baseline health. Meanwhile, you have the ISO acting as the ultimate gold standard for companies that want to go above and beyond. They provide non-governmental, voluntary standardization to ensure just absolutely elite organizational quality.
Let's actually look a little closer at two of those anchors, because the contrast between them is fascinating. Codex is, by design, pretty slow to change because it requires massive government consensus. It outlines the minimal acceptable practices, focusing strictly on baseline health protection and fair trade. ISO, on the other hand, entirely voluntary. It's reviewed rapidly, usually every 5 years, and outlines cutting-edge industrial practices. Its core focus is on overall top-tier organizational quality management, like the famous ISO 9000 series. So to put it simply, Codex dictates the absolute minimum safety floor so governments can protect their citizens, while ISO is like building a high-quality penthouse above it for ambitious companies voluntarily proving they have the best management possible.
Okay, Section 5, Building Proactive Defense Systems. Let's head back down from international law to the actual factory floor and see how these blueprints translate into daily interceptors. Good manufacturing practices, GMP, and good handling practices, GHP, form the absolute bedrock of hygiene. GMP is basically the manufacturer's proactive quality assurance to minimize contamination. GHP is a comprehensive farm-to-store approach ensuring strict personal hygiene for all the food handlers. This preventative shield is your physical foundation. I mean, before a factory can even think about installing lasers, digital tripwires, and high-tech sensors, they need the absolute basics. Handlers washing their hands properly, perfectly sanitized equipment, and pristine environments. It's the non-negotiable bedrock you absolutely have to establish before layering on advanced tactical defenses.
Once that bedrock is firmly in place, then you add the targeted defenses. See, the old way of thinking was deeply flawed. It was basically, wait until the candy bar is fully manufactured, wrapped, boxed up, and then randomly tested. If a batch fails, well, you just throw away $1 million of finished product. It's wildly reactive and honestly incredibly expensive. But HACCP, Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point, completely changed the game. Instead of waiting until the very end, HACCP evaluates every single step in a process. It places highly efficient digital and physical tripwires exactly where a specific hazard might occur, right there on the assembly line. It is the ultimate shift from reactive detection to brilliant proactive prevention.
Finally, Section 6, Careers in Food Safety. Because, let's face it, software and laws don't run themselves. We need highly trained people to keep this massive ecosystem going. Consider this absolutely mind-boggling stat. The food industry accounts for roughly 26% of India's entire GDP. When an industry makes up over a quarter of a nation's GDP, the demand for human guardians is astronomical. You could step into regulatory and public health as an on-the-ground inspector or a legislator. You could join industry and production as a quality control manager or maybe a HACCP EPL TAMLetion trainer. Or you could dive right into entrepreneurship, founding an analytical testing lab or working as an independent ISO certification auditor. The pathways to defend the food supply are incredibly diverse, and they require a vast, dedicated human machinery.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on. Food safety relies on a meticulously designed architecture, scaling all the way from microscopic hazard analysis up to international global trade regulations. So, the next time you open your fridge or take a bite of your favorite snack, don't just taste the ingredients. Think about the global laws, the factory floor tripwires, and the invisible army of dedicated professionals standing between you and microscopic danger. Trust is not an accident, it is engineered. Keep asking questions about the world around you, and we will see you next time.